Bonjour, chers collègues. Je vous souhaite une chaleureuse bienvenue à cette réunion extraordinaire de la réunion des délégués des ministres à l'occasion des 3 ans de la guerre d'agression de la Fédération de Russie contre l'Ukraine. Et je voudrais vous remercier d'être là ce matin avec nous, y compris à l'extérieur, pour la cérémonie des commémorations. Je voudrais vous rappeler que la réunion est retransmise en direct et aussi souhaiter donc la bienvenue à toutes les personnes qui nous suivent à distance. Je souhaiterais également souhaiter la bienvenue à M. Theodoros Roussopoulos, président de l'Assemblée parlementaire, M. Arnfinn Bortzen, vice-président de la Cour européenne des droits de l'homme, M. Gerhard Hermischer, que je ne vois pas, il est là, président de la conférence des OING, et M. Mathieu Maury, le secrétaire général du Congrès. Notre point à l'ordre du jour aujourd'hui, c'est le point 2.3, conséquences de l'agression de la Fédération de Russie contre l'Ukraine. Et je voudrais donc rappeler que 24 heures seulement après le début de l'agression russe et en accord avec l'Assemblée parlementaire, le comité des ministres a décidé de suspendre la Fédération de Russie du Conseil de l'Europe. Et le 16 mars, il l'a exclu de l'organisation. C'est un excellent exemple aussi de la très bonne coordination et coopération entre nos institutions statutaires, le comité de ministres et l'Assemblée parlementaire. Depuis 3 ans maintenant, le Conseil de l'Europe multiplie les initiatives pour aider l'Ukraine à faire face aux conséquences de l'agression de la Russie, notamment par le biais d'un plan d'action d'une ampleur inégalée dans l'histoire de l'organisation, mais également pour aider les enfants ukrainiens pour que les responsables de l'agression russe, ainsi que les auteurs des crimes, notamment contre les civils, soient amenés à rendre compte de leurs actes. Et je voudrais aussi remercier Monsieur le secrétaire général d'avoir publié la semaine dernière un document récapitulant l'action du Conseil de l'Europe en faveur de l'Ukraine en général et aussi en faveur de ses populations les plus vulnérables. Chers collègues, le projet de décision que notre comité est invité à adopter a été distribué dans le document DD 2025-34. Je vous inviterai donc à l'adopter à la fin de la matinée. En commémorant aujourd'hui ce 3e anniversaire du déclenchement de la guerre d'agression de la Russie contre l'Ukraine, nous voulons, en tant qu'organisation et aussi en tant qu'États membres réunis ici, renouveler notre soutien à notre pays ami et partenaire. Mais nous voulons aussi consacrer notre rencontre à la situation des prisonniers civils ukrainiens détenus en Fédération de Russie. À cet effet, j'ai l'honneur d'accueillir parmi nous Mme Yulia Dvornychenko, ex-détenue du centre de détention provisoire de Donetsk et libérée en octobre 2022, et Mme Aksenia Obryko, fille d'un citoyen ukrainien emprisonné. Et je voudrais aussi vous signaler, chers collègues, vous avez sur votre table le régime de la traduction, vu que nos invités vont s'exprimer en ukrainien. Merci. Je vous remercie chaleureusement, mesdames, d'avoir voyagé jusqu'à Strasbourg pour témoigner devant notre comité. Nous l'apprécions énormément, d'autant plus que donner votre témoignage n'est pas facile pour vous, nous l'imaginons fort bien. Je voudrais donc tout d'abord donner la parole à Mme Aksenia Obryko et ensuite une diffusion va être diffusée. Madame, you have the floor.
Що ж, наша історія – одна з 10 тисяч історій, які зараз мають кожна українська сім'я. Мене звати Аксінія Бобруйко, і я з окупованого Мелітополя. Наша історія почалася, напевно, що задовго саме до цієї війни, десь у 1931 році, коли мої прабабушка і прадідусь приїхали чомусь з Криму і врешті мого прадідуся розстріляли як ворога народу. Війну 24 лютого 22 року ми з мамою зустріли усвідомлено і без плекання марних надій. Я встигла прожити в окупованому Мелітополі 3 тижні, перш ніж ми з сином наважилися на евакуацію та втечу з війни до Німеччини. Мій син Еріх народився у 2012 році ще в українському Криму, в українському Севастополі. А вже у 2015-му він вперше мав тікати від російського окупанта до Мелітополя. Моя мама, Бараневська Ольга, залишилася вдома доглядати за своїми літніми батьками, які вже фізично не змогли б витримати шлях евакуації. Мама була звичайною вихователькою, хоча насправді не звичайною, а дуже гарною і дуже хорошою. І понад 35 років вона виховувала українців. Мамине насильницьке зникнення 15 травня 24-го року стало для нас за всіх справжньою трагедією. Це друга людина, яку я знала особисто, хто перебуває у російському полоні. Першою для мене стала Ірина Горобцова. Ірину затримали 13 травня ще у 22-му році, і це був її день народження. 2,5 роки Ірину регулярно піддавали тортурам, катували, гвалтували і знищували її самими жорстокішими способами. Ще до повномасштабного вторгнення у Ірини виявили аневризму, і по сьогодні вона не має жодного доступу до медицини. Ірину у серпні минулого року засудили на 10,5 років ув'язнення за шпигунство. Чому я про неї згадала? Бо ми з нею ровесниці, і я буквально можу все уявити на собі. Щодо причин маминого затримання, у нас немає жодних здогадок. Проте причинами для цього могли бути і те, що вона відмовлялася виходити на роботу в дитячий садок, і пізня примусова паспортизація, і просто якийсь сусід доніс від сусідів. Мама має цукровий діабет першого типу та готувалася до операції з видалення жовчного міхура. Також вона мала інвалідність з полінейропатії. В серпні маму перевезли до слідчого ізолятора у Донецьк. На той момент я вже знала, що маму піддавали тортурам, і вона втратила понад 20 кг ваги. У жовтні я змогла налагодити з мамою особисте листування через мережу, в Росії є окремий мобільний оператор «Зона Телеком». Моя бабуся померла 1 листопада, тому на суд, який відбувся 19 листопада, мама потрапила вже вкрай у депресивному стані. Маму засудили на 6 років за сфальсифікованою справою зберігання вибухових речовин. Такий сценарій є дуже подібним для всіх жінок, які потрапляють в полон з наших окупованих територій. Наступне, про кого я хочу розказати, ще, вибачте, я трошки нервуюсь, про Аліну, яка відбуває покарання. Вона була разом з мамою у слідчому ізоляторі Донецьку, а зараз вона перебуває у жіночій колонії Мелітополя. Про неї я згадую, тому що зараз її чоловік не має жодного доступу, контакту з нею, тому що передачі і візити в Донецьку можливі були, у Мелітополі цього не можна робити. А передачі для наших полонених – це їжа, перш за все, це одяг і ліки, які там ніхто не надає. І я переживаю, що після переведення моєї мами до нової колонії вона взагалі втратить доступ до будь-яких медичних засобів. У іншої маминої нової подруги Наталі їй вже понад 9 місяців не можуть визначитися з обвинуваченням. Саме сестра Наталі піклувалася від першого дня перебування у Донецькому ізоляторі мами, передавали їй передачі. Тому що на окупованих територіях і взагалі в Україні з наших родичів вже нікого не залишилось. І мама залишилась там наодинці. І саме Наталя і Аліна піклувалися про маму в камері, коли їй було зле. І завдяки абсолютно чужим людям моя мама має можливість виживати у цих нелюдських умовах. Найчастя доля спіткала Олену. Олена – це мамина подруга і колишня колежанка за дитячим садком. 16 травня саме Олена знайшла мене через соціальні мережі і повідомила, що мама не виходить на зв'язок. а вже 17 травня Олену так само забрали з дому. На сьогоднішній день подальша доля Олени залишається невідомою. На окупованих територіях люди продовжують зникати щодня пачками, незалежно від віку, статі чи їх соціального статусу. За неофіційними підрахунками, зараз у російському полоні перебуває понад 60 тисяч цивільних українців. Найбільшим шоком за останній час для мене стало зникнення Павла. Йому 24 роки. Він має психічний розлад. Він аутист. Чому я про нього згадала? Бо саме він 19 листопада їхав з мамою до Мелітополя на суд. І потім він своїй мамі розповів по телефону, що бачив мою, що у неї вже набрякли ноги, що під час транспортування їй не дозволяли навіть сходити до туалету. Льоня зараз взагалі багато про що розповідав, тому що аутисти не вміють брехати, це їх така особливість. А зараз його перевели зі слідчого ізолятора Донецька до психіатричної лікарні, де, напевно, йому колять галоперидол та інші транквілізатори, які повністю знищують особистість і стирають пам'ять. І найбільше, що нам зараз потрібно, це найшвидше розробити дієвий механізм повернення усіх полонених з російського полону. У кожного є своя ціна, і життя теж має ціну. І у кожного є сумління. І ми кожного дня робимо вибір. І тепер вибір все ж таки за вами. Тому що звільнення усіх полонених – це є суть гуманного суспільства. І є люди ціни, а є люди цінностей. Я сподіваюся на вибір ваш. Дякую.
Thank you, Madame Bobrico, for your testimony. We are going now to watch a video.
Заховаю в хмари, заховаю. А ти моя рясною.
Ви побачите відео, яке створене на реальних історіях жінок. Жінок із нашої організації. Воно демонструє лише крихітну частину того жаху, який щодня проживають українські цивільні в російському полоні. Це не художня вигадка, не перебільшення, це реальність. Декатування, приниження, сексуальне насильство та відсутність будь-яких прав стали нормою для тих, хто потрапив в цю пастку. Європейському суспільству важко уявити, в яких умовах утримуються наші жінки і чоловіки. Це не просто порушення прав людини, це системний терор, який застосовує Росія як інструмент знищення всього українського. Це реальність торкнулась і мене. Вибачте, я трохи хвилююсь. Мене звати Юля Дворніченко. Я представниця громадської організації «Нума Сестри». Я майже 2 роки була в російському полоні. Я була в одній із найжорстокіших тюрем ізоляція. Майже 2 роки гвалтувань, побиття, катування, без жодного виправдання, без жодного сенсу. Майже 2 роки я не бачила своїх неповнолітніх синів. Тільки тому, що я українка. Сьогодні виповнюється 3 роки з початку повномасштабного вторгнення Росії в Україну. 3 роки болю, насильства, смертей. Але війна саме для мене почалася набагато раніше. Коли Росія незаконно війшла в Україну в 22-му році, я вже рік перебувала в полоні. Моя сім'я стала жертвою цієї війни ще в 2014 році. Ми внутрішньо переміщені особи, біженці у власній країні. Нещодавно мій 13-річний син, зараз йому 13, сказав, що він не пам'ятає життя без війни. Коли почалась війна, йому було 3 роки. 3 роки. Він не пам'ятає, як жити без тривог, без сирен, без бомб. Діти України змушені розрізняти, що таке шахет, що таке, як звучить ракета під час прильоту. Скільки є часу дойти до укриття, не дойти, а добігти. Це їх реальність. І це не може бути нормою в цивілізованому світі. Хочу звернути вашу увагу на українців, які десятиліттями лишаються у російському полоні. Дехто з них не дочекався обміну. Їхнє життя обірвалося в підвалах російських катівень. Інші продовжують боротися, втрачають своє здоров'я, молодість, можливість бачити рідних, але вони не втрачають віру. Але вони не втрачають надію. Пам'ятаю той день, коли стався мій обмін полоненими. Мене супроводжували дівчата з моєї камери Наталія Власова, яку викрали ще в 19-му році, і вона досі перебуває в полоні. Її утримують, як і мене, і катують, як і мене. Вона була на ізоляції. Світлана Довгань, вона хвора на цукровий діабет, і вона не має можливості отримувати ліки. Втрачає сили, піддається нелюдським тортурам. Залишаючи у полоні, вони благали мене лише про одне: Юлічка, не забувай про нас. Юлічка, кажи про нас. Я не забула, я пам'ятаю. Але я не можу одна щось змінити. Взагалі нічого. На самоті я не можу зробити. Саме тому я потребую вашої підтримки. Саме тому ми не маємо права мовчати про ту реальність, яку намагаються приховати Росія. Завтра може бути пізно. Завтра може принести нові смерті, нові страждання, зламати долі нові. Але сьогодні ми ще можемо діяти. Сьогодні я звертаюся за вас з благанням. Я благаю. Допоможіть звільнити наших людей. Не залишайте нас наодинці з Росією. Не мовчіть. Кожен день у полоні – це неможливі страдання. Життя у темряві, без надії на майбутнє. Це боротьба не тільки за виживання, а й гідність на право бути людиною. Ваш голос може стати надією для українських цивільних за ґратами. Ваше рішення може врятувати їх життя. Вірю, що Всесвіт і світ не може стояти осторонь. Вірю, що ви почуєте цей заклик. Олена Федорук. Її вже було звільнено, на щастя, але вона була майже 7 років в полоні. Навіть більше, здається. Аліса Андрієнка, ми не маємо її фото, її звільнили, але вона з 18-го року була в полоні і звільнили її в 23-му. Маріна Юрчак, вона була затримана в 17-му році і звільнена лише в 24-му. Алена Пех, в 18-му році її затримали, звільнена в 24-му. Вікторія Рощина, вона, на жаль, не дочекалась свого обміну. Її просто вбили. Як нам зробити початок презентації? Ні, це не початок. Перепрошую. Світлана Довгань. Ця жінка проведжала мене на обмін. Вона заарештована в 19-му році. Вона досі утримується в Донецьку, і вона перебувала на ізоляції більше 2 років. Ізоляція – це дика тюрма, катівня, де люди можуть не пережити ті катування, які вони там роблять. Світлана Головань, вона також утримується з 19-го року. Я особисто знаю цих дівчат. Вона має 2 неповнолітніх доньок, і її засудили більше до 10 років. Карина Дудко, жінка, я особисто її не бачила, але я чула її через стінку камери. Я знаю, що вона досі утримується там. Дар'я Сафонова. Я не знаю особисто цю жінку, але вона також утримується. Ольга Мілєщенка, вона була зі мною в Донецьку, і вона утримується досі. Ірина Левченко. Всі вони заарештовані. Ірина Данилович, Яна Суворова. Всі ці жінки, вони просто українки, вони просто затримані за те, що вони підтримали Україну, за те, що вони не погодилися на цю окупаційну владу. І це тільки маленька частина тих жінок, про котрих ми щось знаємо, а їх набагато більше. Їх просто набагато більше. Можна перелистувати і перелистувати. Наталія Власова має неповнолітню доньку. Наталя також проведжала мене на обмін. Зараз багато в інтернеті пишуть за Наталію Власову, бо вона якось, не знаю, яким дивом, її суд, саме стенограма, її промова, вона вийшла в інтернет і вона розказує про катування, які з нею там робили. що 15 чоловік прийшли її гвалтувати, що їй спилювали зуби, що її катували струмом. Це такі жахіття, і це правда. Це правда, тому що вона особисто мені це казала, я знаю її особисто. І зараз її донька в Києві під обстрілами, і вона росте без матері. Її донька, вона не бачить свою маму. Ну, це жах. Можна і надалі перелистувати, але, як сказала Ксенія, ми знаємо, що таких людей понад 60 тисяч. І це тільки цивільні, їх понад 60 тисяч. Кожна секунда для полонених українців є жахливим випробуванням, яке не кожен може витримати. Вони чекають на порятунок, і цей порятунок залежить від нас. Допоможіть нам повернути наших людей додому. Підтримайте Україну. Разом ми зможемо зупинити це зло. Дякую за увагу.
Mesdames, nous sommes extrêmement reconnaissants d'être venus témoigner ici aujourd'hui et nous mesurons l'énorme courage que vous devez rassembler pour partager votre expérience avec nous. Parler de ce que vous avez subi vous-même, c'est horrible. Parler de ce que des personnes proches de vous, vos familles, ont subi et subissent toujours. Je crois que nous sommes tous ébranlés et très affectés, très émus par ce que vous nous avez dit. Mais ce n'est qu'en en parlant que vous pouvez attirer l'attention sur quelque chose qui reste très largement caché, malheureusement, dont on parle pas beaucoup. Et c'était l'intention de la présidente, justement, d'attirer l'attention du comité sur une situation extrêmement dure et difficile, mais qui a lieu pas très loin d'ici, dans les territoires que la Russie occupe en Ukraine. Donc encore une fois, un grand merci pour votre témoignage et nous voulons rendre hommage à votre courage et à votre engagement. Je vais maintenant passer la parole à notre collègue Boris, l'ambassadeur d'Ukraine. Boris, you have the floor if you want to say something now.
Thank you, Patrick. Dear Secretary General, dear President of the Parliamentary Assembly, dear colleagues and friends, we have just heard harrowing testimonies from Aksenia and Yulia. Their voices, raw and filled with pain, are a stark reminder of the brutal reality facing countless Ukrainian civilians at the hands of the Russian Federation. These testimonies and the date 24th February are inseparably linked. They underscore the deliberate systemic nature of Russia's war crimes and crimes against humanity. The stories we have heard are not isolated incidents. They represent the suffering of thousands of Ukrainian civilians, teachers, journalists, volunteers, and ordinary people who have been abducted and illegally detained within Russia and in occupied territories. These are not combatants. They are innocent civilians targeted solely for their Ukrainian identity. The reality is undeniable. Russia's forces have engaged in the deliberate kidnapping of civilians, a clear violation of international humanitarian law. Survivors recount horrific tales of torture, psychological abuse, and the denial of essential medical care. Countless civilians, including vulnerable children, have been forcibly deported to Russia, preventing their ties to their families and their homeland. International organizations, notably the ICRC, are consistently denied full and unfettered access to these detention facilities, concealing the true extent of this humanitarian catastrophe. These actions constitute war crimes and crimes against humanity, genocide against Ukrainian nation. They are a direct, calculated assault on the core values of the Council of Europe, human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. We cannot, we must not remain silent in the face of such atrocities. Therefore, building upon the urgent appeals we just heard, I implore the Council of Europe and its member states to take decisive actions. We must demand the immediate and unconditional release of all Ukrainian civilian prisoners. This is not a matter of negotiations. It is a fundamental human right. We must intensify pressure on Russia to grant full and unfettered access to the international monitoring mechanisms, including the ICRC, to all detention facilities. We must fully support the ongoing investigation by the International Criminal Court and other relevant bodies into these war crimes. Impunity is unacceptable. We must strengthen sanctions against Russia, specifically targeting those responsible for these heinous acts. We must increase support for Ukrainian efforts to document and address these human rights violations, ensuring that every victim's story is heard and every perpetrator is held accountable. And crucially, we must work tirelessly towards the repatriation of all deported Ukrainian children, reuniting them with their families and their homeland. The suffering of Ukrainian civilians, as we have just witnessed, is a profound stain on our collective conscience. Let us use this date to reaffirm our unwavering commitment to justice, accountability, and the protection of human rights. Let us work together with renewed determination to secure the release of these innocent people and to hold Russia accountable for its crimes. Ukraine will prevail. We will not yield to our fight for freedom, sovereignty, and the fundamental values that unite us. And I thank you very much.
Thank you, dear Boris. I give now the floor to the Secretary General, followed by the President of the Assembly. Monsieur le Secrétaire Général, vous avez la parole.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président du Comité des ministres, Mesdames et Messieurs les membres du Comité des ministres, Monsieur le Président de l'Assemblée parlementaire, Mesdames et Messieurs. Tout d'abord, permettez-moi d'adresser des remerciements personnels et directs à Aksenia et Yulia, qui sont avec nous ce matin, pour le témoignage que vous avez porté, un témoignage absolument poignant, avec la réalité à laquelle l'Ukraine est confrontée et sa population civile est confrontée aujourd'hui. Et je le dis parce que c'est l'occasion à chaque fois de nous rappeler que la protection de la dignité humaine est un des premiers éléments qui fondent toute notre action autour du rôle du Conseil de l'Europe et des valeurs que nous défendons. Merci de votre présence ce matin avec nous. Nous marquons aujourd'hui le début de la guerre en Ukraine. Boris l'a rappelé ce matin, la guerre a commencé en 2014. Elle s'est dramatiquement développée en 2022, ce 24 février 2022. Une guerre d'agression qui est une guerre illégale, une guerre d'agression qui est injustifiée, injustifiable, une guerre d'agression qui n'a pas été provoquée. Et c'est une guerre dont les profondes implications géopolitiques ne cessent de toucher l'Ukraine, bien sûr, mais aussi tout le continent européen, l'ordre européen et le monde entier. Alors nous avons condamné cette agression sans équivoque, très clairement, et avec la plus grande fermeté. Et cette condamnation a d'ailleurs conduit les délégués des ministres, en suivant en cela l'article 8 du statut du Conseil de l'Europe, à mettre fin à l'adhésion de la Fédération de Russie au Conseil de l'Europe. Et cette décision a été effective le 16 mars 2022. Et 3 ans après, eh bien, nous mesurons tout le chemin qui a été parcouru. J'ai eu l'occasion, vous le savez, on en a parlé déjà, de mettre en place une task force au sein du Conseil de l'Europe pour coordonner toutes les activités en soutien à l'Ukraine et collaborer avec nos partenaires. Et cette task force s'est réunie pour la première fois le 7 février dernier. Et vous avez sur la table le rapport que le président du comité des ministres, dont le président a rappelé la présence, un rapport qui vient d'être publié sur la base des contributions des membres de la task force et qui fait le point sur notre réponse, la réponse que peut apporter le Conseil de l'Europe, là où le Conseil de l'Europe a une valeur ajoutée, en coordination évidemment avec d'autres organisations, avec des pays membres, avec les pays du continent européen et du monde entier, et là où nous avons pu apporter une réponse en matière de justice, de réparation, de lutte contre la corruption, de renforcement démocratique, dans le domaine de la jeunesse, de la liberté des médias, et bien plus encore. Et j'aimerais saisir cette occasion aujourd'hui, cette triste commémoration de 3 ans de l'agression massive à pleine échelle de la Russie contre l'Ukraine, pour réaffirmer devant vous l'importance de mettre la notion de responsabilité au cœur de nos réflexions et de nos efforts. Et dans ce sens, rappeler ici que le registre des dommages mis en place par le Conseil de l'Europe suite au sommet de Reykjavik fonctionne. Que ce registre des dommages doit se poursuivre avec un plein mécanisme d'indemnisation et de compensation. Et que ces travaux, sous notre impulsion et avec l'adhésion de toutes celles et ceux qui le soutiennent, ce mécanisme et cette évolution progressent. Nous avançons également concernant l'établissement du tribunal spécial pour le crime d'agression dans le cadre du Conseil de l'Europe. Il s'agit là d'une question de principe absolu et que nous devons apporter avec détermination et aussi avec réalisme. Et 3 ans après, eh bien, nous restons mobilisés pour les enfants d'Ukraine, qui portent un fardeau immense. Tous les exemples qui nous ont été signalés, qui nous ont été mentionnés par Aksinia et Yulia, nous rappellent que derrière chaque destin individuel, il y a des familles, il y a des enfants. Plusieurs de ces femmes que vous avez mentionné leurs enfants. Pour vous-même aussi, Yulia, vos enfants. Et les enfants d'Ukraine méritent naturellement un engagement total de notre part. Je rappelle ici que mon envoyé spécial, Tordis Gilfadottir, a été nommé le 5 février dernier. Elle a entamé immédiatement son action avec beaucoup d'engagement. Elle était d'ailleurs présente au forum de Vilnius vendredi dernier, il y a 2 jours, et elle a rappelé une vérité qui me paraît essentielle. Reconstruire l'Ukraine passe d'abord par protéger ses enfants, où qu'ils soient, y compris ceux, bien sûr, déportés illégalement. Et leur réadaptation avec des soins adaptés au traumatisme devra être une priorité. Mesdames et messieurs, chers collègues, la démocratie, les droits humains et l'état de droit ont toujours guidé et continuent de guider l'action du Conseil de l'Europe en Ukraine. Et ce sera le cas jusqu'à ce que la liberté soit assurée, jusqu'à ce que la justice soit rendue et jusqu'à ce qu'une paix juste et durable soit rétablie. Je vous remercie.
Merci, Monsieur le Secrétaire Général. I would like now to invite the President of the Parliamentary Assembly to make comments. You have the floor.
Thank you, dear Chair of the Committee of Ministers, dear Secretary General, Ambassadors, dear colleagues. Since 2014, Ukraine has lost 20% of its territory, suffered immense destruction, and above all, endured the tragic loss of countless lives. Prisoners of war remain in captivity. Civilians are illegally detained, tortured, raped, what one could add after Aksinia's and Yulia's testimonies. This war is not only against Ukraine, it is an assault on our democratic values, the international order, and our shared European identity. Earlier today, during the commemoration ceremony, I spoke about the historical roots of just peace. Now I want to focus on the future, because we at the Parliamentary Assembly and you, the Committee of Ministers, are shaping history. Our commitment to accountability for this aggression, rooted in justice and compensation, is becoming a reality. I'm particularly encouraged by the full operationalization of the Register of Damages, a crucial initiative I recently discussed at the Conference of the Parties. Another significant step is the finalization of the ad hoc tribunal for the crime of aggression. The core group is working diligently on its statute, and its next meeting will be held in Strasbourg in a few weeks. We must seize the moment. In that regard, I encourage the Committee of Ministers to use the upcoming ministerial conference hosted by the Luxembourg Presidency in May to finalize this unprecedented initiative. The work on compensation mechanisms also continues, and the Assembly stands ready to provide the expertise to ensure its completion by the end of this year. It is always encouraging to see how the Parliamentary Assembly's initiatives take shape through strong cooperation with the Committee of Ministers. As President, I fully support these efforts. A few weeks ago, we debated Ukraine's situation in our hemicycle. Some may call it another discussion, but once again, our Assembly demonstrated leadership, making clear that Europe must reject any attempt to decide Ukraine's future without Ukraine. Diplomatic efforts for peace must be grounded in peace through strength, as defined by the Ukrainian authorities. A just and lasting peace requires robust security guarantees for Ukraine, and any negotiations must be approached from a position of resilience and strong defense capacity. The Assembly has made its stance clear. European states must enhance their self-sufficiency and strategic autonomy to strengthen defense resilience and regional security. We all want an end to the suffering in Ukraine, the return of displaced persons, prisoners of war, and thousands of children who forcibly removed from their homeland, their language and their culture. Ukraine, dear friends, is being suffocated for years now. And it was really symbolic what we have seen at the video earlier, the suffocation of a country. This country needs oxygen, oxygen of peace, but peace based on justice and international law. Any other approach would fail, undermining the very foundations of our shared values and European security. Ukraine needs a united and strong Europe. Likewise, Europe needs a secure future for Ukraine. The outcome of this war will shape European and global security for generations to come. This must be our common position and our ultimate objective. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I'm going now to open the floor to delegations to make comments and statements if they wish. And I have here delegations coming in. First one is European Union, followed by Portugal and Romania. Vesna, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President, and allow me to start by thanking very much to our guests today, to Julia and Axinia, for your brave, important, heart-wrenching testimonies that resonate deeply. I have the honor to deliver an EU statement to mark the beginning of Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. 3 full years have passed since Russia started its illegal, unjustified, and unprovoked full-scale invasion against Ukraine, causing immense human suffering and destruction. The European Union reiterates its resolute condemnation of Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine, which constitutes a manifest violation of the United Nations Charter, and reaffirms its continued support for Ukraine's independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity within its internationally recognized borders. The EU also strongly condemns third countries' continued support for Russia's war of aggression and urges them to cease all assistance. The occupation of Ukrainian territories by the Russian Federation has been carried out in an atmosphere of generalized violence and fear to coerce the local population to cooperate with the Russian occupying authorities while suppressing their Ukrainian identity. The EU strongly condemns the ongoing widespread and gross violations of international human rights and grave violations of humanitarian law that have been committed by Russia. We call on Russia to immediately and unconditionally cease its aggression and withdraw all of its military forces and equipment from the territory of Ukraine, release unlawfully detained civilians and prisoners of war, and return all persons, in particular children, who have been forcibly transferred or deported. The UN's Independent Commission of Inquiry has found that Russian authorities committed crimes against humanity through systematic torture in detention facilities. Reports of executions of captured Ukrainian service members are rising. The EU strongly condemns these atrocities and the inhuman conditions of captivity. Russia must comply with international humanitarian law and grant full, unhindered access to prisoners of war in occupied territories and Russian detention facilities. All victims deserve justice. There can be no impunity for violations of international law. We underscore the need to pursue a comprehensive approach to accountability, which includes truth, reparation, and guarantees of non-reoccurrence. Russia and its leadership must be held fully accountable for waging a war of aggression against Ukraine and for other most serious crimes under international law, as well as for the massive damage caused by its war. As part of the core group, Ukraine, the European External Action Service, the European Commission, the Council of Europe, and 37 states will continue discussions aimed at setting the legal framework for the establishment of a special tribunal for the crime of aggression against Ukraine. On 4 February 2025, the European Commission made a recommendation to the Council for the EU to participate in the formal negotiations to set up an International Claims Commission for Ukraine. The Claims Commission aims to review, assess, and decide eligible claims recorded in the Register of Damage, in which the EU is already a participant. We recall the Reykjavik Summit in 2023 and reiterate our support for comprehensive, just, and lasting peace based on the principles of the United Nations Charter and international law. We underline the principle that no initiative regarding Ukraine be taken without Ukraine. To this end, the European Union and its member states will maintain their intensive global outreach efforts and will participate in the discussions affecting Europe's security. We call for the return of all prisoners of war, unlawfully detained civilians, and deported or forcibly transferred children. The EU remains committed to supporting Ukraine's repair, recovery, and reconstruction in coordination with international partners. Since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion 3 years ago, the EU has provided to Ukraine 134.7 billion euros in humanitarian, financial, economic, and military support, making the EU the largest supporter of Ukraine. We will continue to work closely with Ukraine and support its continued reform efforts on its European path. The European Union will stand by Ukraine with steadfast support for as long as it takes and as intensely as needed. The following countries align to this statement: Albania, Andorra, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Georgia, Iceland, Liechtenstein, Republic of Moldova, Monaco, Montenegro, North Macedonia, Norway, Ukraine, and the United Kingdom. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. First, now I give now the floor to Portugal, followed by Romania and Poland. Ambassador, you have the floor.
3 years have now passed since Russia launched its illegal, unjustified and unprovoked full-scale invasion of Ukraine. The Russian authorities have repeatedly committed a series of violations of international human rights law, international humanitarian law and war crimes against the Ukrainian people, in violation of the core principles of the United Nations Charter, causing extensive damage and immense human suffering. As part of its blatant violations of international law, the Russian leadership has perpetrated widespread atrocities against Ukrainian civilians and prisoners of war, including arbitrary detentions, executions, torture, ill treatment, enforced disappearances and killings, as we heard today. Portugal strongly condemns these atrocities and urges Russia to immediately cease its aggression, release all illegally detained civilians and prisoners of war, and ensure the return of all forcibly transferred persons, including children. We commend and strongly support the Council of Europe's efforts to assist Ukraine and ensure accountability, particularly through the creation of the Register of Damage, the Action Plan for Ukraine, and the ongoing work towards establishing a special tribunal for the crime of aggression within the Council of Europe and the Claims Commission for Ukraine. Portugal reiterates here today in the Council of Europe its unwavering support for Ukraine's independence, sovereignty and territorial integrity, as well as its commitment to a comprehensive, just and sustainable peace which can only be achieved with Ukraine's full participation. Let me conclude by commending you, Chair, for convening this dedicated session and by fully supporting the EU statement. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Gilberto. I give now the floor to Romania, followed by Poland and Norway. Jon, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President, cher Patrick. Today we are marking the third commemoration of the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine, an illegal and unjustified attack against a sovereign and independent state, an assault against all the values and principles that bind us together in this room. In total disregard of the principles enshrined in the UN Charter, Russia is aiming at redrawing maps and borders already established and internationally recognized. The future peace in Ukraine must be founded on the UN Charter and the international law. We cannot be indifferent to what kind of peace is achieved in and for Ukraine. It should be a just and lasting peace. Just because the Ukrainians deserve justice. There is no proper peace without justice. This is why our collective efforts on ensuring accountability of war perpetrators should continue. We are deeply, deeply impressed by the powerful testimonies and the courage of the Ukrainian war prisoners, an exceptional example of resilience in dreadful circumstances. Russia should immediately release all of them. Lasting, because it is essential to make sure that another aggression in the future is deterred and prevented. This last point is extremely relevant for the countries on the eastern flank and for the whole of Europe. Ukraine's security is part of Europe's security. Therefore, our collective aims should be, first, to continue to support Ukraine. Second, to keep Ukraine involved in any discussions about Ukraine. Third, to keep Europe involved in any discussions about European security. And fourth, to keep working on advancing Ukraine's European and Euro-Atlantic path. Romania is among the strongest advocates of Ukraine's EU and Euro-Atlantic aspirations. We have worked together on many important issues to advance the integration of Ukraine in the European single market and prepare the reconstruction process. We are involved in efforts to ensure accountability, and we will be part of Ukraine's reconstruction efforts. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Jon. I give now the floor to Norway, Netherlands, and Belgium, but I would like to remind you, colleagues, if you could limit your intervention to 2 minutes. I have 26 delegations still lining up, and I would really very much like to give the floor to everyone rather than having to cut at some points the list. But you disappeared, so ask again. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. For the last years, we have seen time and time again the courage and tenacity of the Ukrainian nation. We know very well that the future of Ukraine is inextricably linked to that of Europe. We need a good peace that will be just and sustainable in a longer term. The solution has to be based on good fundamentals, protection of Ukraine's independence, territorial integrity and sovereignty, guarantees of security for Ukraine, maintenance of the sanctions on Russia and Belarus, and reduction of the possible risk of further Russian aggression in future. Let me remind you that under Polish presidency, UA actually imposed a new sanction on Russia. It is also important to offer redress for the individuals who have suffered as a result of Russia's brutal war. That is why Poland supports the creation of international compensation mechanism under the auspice of the Council of Europe. I wish to ensure you and your fellow Ukrainian citizens you are not forgotten. Your voices matter, and you can count on our continued support. Let me repeat, nothing about Ukraine and Europe without Ukraine and Europe. Europe will prevail. Ukraine must win. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alexander. I give now the floor to Norway, followed by Netherlands and Belgium. Helge, you have the floor.
Mr. Chairman, today marks 3 years since Russia launched its illegal full-scale invasion of Ukraine. The heroic efforts of the Ukrainian people throughout over 3 years of horror is deeply impressive. Lives have been lost, homes destroyed, but their fight for freedom continues. Ukraine fights not only for its own survival, but for the very principles that bind us together: sovereignty, freedom, democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. They're also fighting for European security, and it is fundamentally important for European security that Ukraine wins. We cannot allow Russia to reshape the security order in Europe by force. The outcome of the war will have fundamental and long-lasting effects on European and transatlantic security. It will also have immense global implications. As for peace talks, Norway is of the view that there can be no peace talks without Ukraine or Europe. Nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine, nothing about Europe without Europe. Any solution must be just, lasting, and guarantee Ukraine's full independence, sovereignty, and freedom to choose its own path, including its alliances, both now and in the future. Mr. Chairman, moving forward, Europe must do more in all areas to ensure Ukraine's future. It is essential to maintain significant military support to Ukraine. Norway will continue its extensive and long-term support for Ukraine, military, financial, and humanitarian. Norway stands fully and firmly behind Ukraine. We remain unwavering in our resolve that a just and lasting peace can only be achieved on Ukraine's terms through strength, not submission. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Ambassador. I give now the floor to the Netherlands, followed by Belgium and Republic of Moldova. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Dear Axinia, dear Julia, dear Boris, dear children, women and men from Ukraine. Yes, we are listening. We are listening, but not living the war, like you. And it is indeed impossible to imagine what you have lived and are living through. I just want to live in peace was written on a cardboard a young girl was holding during a demonstration yesterday in the Netherlands. I just want to live in peace. For peace to become reality, listening is not enough. We have to continue to act, as Boris mentioned. And in this action, Ukraine can count on the Netherlands' unwavering support, militarily, financially, politically, and morally. In the last few turbulent weeks, we are looking in the eye of history. And I think none of us can predict what will happen in the next weeks and months. But whatever that may be, for the Netherlands, there can only be one outcome. And that is a just and sustainable peace for Ukraine and Europe. That means a peace that not only ends hostilities here and now, but also guarantees a safe future. That is why it is so important that Ukraine remains strong on the battlefield, because we need a peace through strength. And furthermore, it's crucial that your and our voices are heard and listened to in the negotiation process. A ceasefire without Ukraine, a ceasefire without Europe at the table is not an option. Nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. Nothing about Europe without Europe. We owe it to the children of Ukraine who just want to live in peace.
Thank you, Tanya. I give now the floor to Belgium, followed by Moldova and Malta. Madame l'ambassadrice, vous avez la parole.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. En cette triste journée de commémoration, ma délégation voudrait tout d'abord remercier les deux témoins que nous venons d'entendre. Mesdames, votre courage est absolument remarquable. Votre expérience et votre souffrance doivent nous encourager à ne pas laisser ces actes impunis. Comme en a attesté la Commission d'enquête internationale indépendante, l'utilisation généralisée et systématique de la torture par la Fédération de Russie contre les civils et les prisonniers de guerre est claire. Il est établi qu'il s'agit d'une politique d'État coordonnée. Des pratiques répétées destinées à effrayer, briser, humilier, contraindre et punir les détenus sont monnaie courante. Le recours à la violence sexuelle ainsi qu'au refus de soins médicaux est récurrent. Les auteurs de ces actes doivent être identifiés, poursuivis et sanctionnés afin de mettre fin à la culture de l'impunité. La Belgique continuera à apporter son plein soutien au registre des dommages, à la commission des plaintes et à l'établissement d'un tribunal spécial pour le crime d'agression contre l'Ukraine. Par ailleurs, la Belgique réitère que la paix doit s'appuyer sur un processus de paix incluant toutes les parties concernées autour de la table. Nous voulons tous la paix, pas une paix imposée aux Ukrainiens de l'extérieur, une paix juste et durable. Merci.
Merci Delphine. Je passe maintenant la parole à la délégation de Moldova, suivie de Malte et Monténégro. Madame l'ambassadrice, vous avez la parole.
Thank you, Chair. 3 years ago, the European values which lay at the core of the Council of Europe were brutally dissolved. The fundamental principles of international law were blatantly violated. History was attempted to be rewritten. For Ukraine and its people, the war of aggression waged by Russian Federation came with immense suffering. For 3 years, the right to life, peaceful existence, dignity, education, health is being disregarded. The civilians and critical infrastructure are being deliberately targeted by the Russian attacks, children and civilians abducted, and families are being torn apart. The right of people to choose its development path along European values is being denied. The testimonies we have just heard were appalling. We reiterate on this tragic anniversary the Republic of Moldova's full solidarity with Ukraine and its people who are courageously and legitimately defending of Russia's illegal, unprovoked and unjustified full-scale military invasion. Since the first days of Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine, we have put forward our assistance in meeting the needs of displaced Ukrainians in Moldova, but also of the Ukrainian people. Our support and commitment to the sovereignty, independence, unity and territorial integrity of Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders is unconditional. We call for the withdrawal of Russian troops from all temporary occupied territories of Ukraine and stress the need for robust security guarantees for Ukraine to be ensured by the international community. In this context, we strongly underline the need for accountability and justice. The establishment of a special international tribunal to ensure Russian Federation's accountability for the war of aggression against Ukraine is an important step in this direction and has our full support. The Council of Europe has been since day one of the war at the forefront of our support for Ukraine, which is fighting for the European values, for democracy and rule of law, for the freedom to choose its own path, for the freedom from fear, and for bringing back hope that justice can prevail. Today, more than before, our collective resolute commitment to these values is of vital importance, and the Republic of Moldova is determined to further support Council of Europe activities in continuously transforming this commitment into acts and deliverables. I thank you.
Thank you very much. I give now the floor to Madam Ambassador of Malta.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On this solemn occasion, marking 3 years since the start of Russia's illegal, unjustified and unprovoked war of aggression against Ukraine, Malta continues to stand firm in its support with Ukraine and its brave people. Without repeating what was said by the European Union statement, which Malta fully aligns with, allow me to add that Europe is at a pivotal moment in history, a moment that demands clarity of purpose, strength of conviction and unwavering solidarity, as atrocities continue to be perpetrated by the Russian Federation and as the largest displacement crisis in Europe since the Second World War continues to unfold with innocent civilians paying the highest price. Ukraine's struggle is not just its own, it's a battle for European unity, sovereignty, and the very values that define us: freedom, human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. To support Ukraine is to defend these principles and values that the Council of Europe was created to safeguard and uphold. And that is why Ukraine must emerge with its sovereignty and territorial integrity intact and those responsible held accountable. Because there can be no comprehensive, just and lasting peace without justice, without accountability and without respect for international law. Because standing with Ukraine is standing for a world where law prevails over brute force and where the rights of people triumph over the ambitions of autocrats. Because to waver is to embolden those who believe that might is right, that power, not law, should dictate the fate of nations. And because this war is about the stability of the international order and the credibility of our commitments to the values and principles of this organization and of the United Nations Charter, which we all claim to uphold. Let us therefore make sure that the extraordinary courage of our Ukrainian sisters and brothers continues to be met with our commitment, their resilience reinforced by our resolve, and their hope supported by our decisive actions. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Francesca. The next three delegations are Montenegro, Sweden, and Spain. Madam Ambassador, you have the floor.
Thank you, Patrick. While Montenegro fully aligns with the EU statement, I would also like to make an intervention in my national capacity. We are entering the fourth year of the illegal, unprovoked, and unjustified war of aggression of the Russian Federation, which brought immense suffering to Ukraine and its people. We condemn Russian flagrant violations of international law, including forcible deportation of Ukrainian citizens and children, unlawful detentions, and inhuman treatment of civilians and prisoners of war. We call for their release and full accountability and justice for all victims and crimes committed. In this regard, we commend the strong support of the Council of Europe to Ukraine. Montenegro reiterates the importance of the comprehensive framework to deliver justice to Ukraine, including the establishment of the Special Tribunal for the crime of aggression. By defending its territory and freedom, Ukraine also defends the common values of Europe and a free and democratic world. We need to continue to show unity and resolve in seeking a just and lasting peace, one that fully respects Ukrainians' independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity, and its inherent rights to determine its own future. We stand firmly with Ukraine and its people. I thank you.
Thank you, Boba. I give now the floor to Sweden, followed by Spain and Latvia. Therese, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What Putin hoped to be a three-day war has now turned into 3 years of continued aggression against Ukraine. I believe we are gathered here today with a shared sense of purpose and determination in support of Ukraine and the Ukrainian people. And in the words of the Swedish Foreign Minister, our task is clear. We must constrain Russia's harmful capabilities through our unwavering support to Ukraine. This also means that Ukraine must be part of any negotiations about its territory and its future, and Europe should be there as well. Aksenia and Yulia, thank you so much for your testimonies and for those of your families and your friends. They are deeply touching and deeply disturbing. And unfortunately, you are not alone, and the violations that you have suffered and many other violations keep recurring. And to counter these violations, we are determined to bring those responsible to account through existing means within the ICC, and we must press on with establishing a special tribunal for the crime of aggression with urgency. We must facilitate the return of all deported civilians, including children, and we must provide legal and psychological support to all those affected. And as part of the 6.5 billion euros that Sweden has awarded to Ukraine so far, allow me to finish with just one example, which is the Ukraine War Archives, created by the organization DocuDays, which is a digital archive with millions of pieces of evidence of war crimes to ensure that the truth is documented and remembered. Sweden's commitment to Ukraine reconstruction, development and future is unwavering. We stand with Ukraine and its people today and onwards. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I give now the floor to Spain, followed by Latvia and Switzerland. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. needless to say that Spain fully aligns itself with the declaration made by the European Union. Our Prime Minister, Pedro Sánchez, is in Kyiv right now with other European leaders to reiterate Spain's continued support to Ukraine and to President Zelensky, showing that Ukraine is a constant priority for my government and Europe. On this third anniversary, we condemn once again this illegal, unprovoked, and unjustified war of aggression by Russia against Ukraine, which is an attack on the most essential principles of the UN Charter and of this Council of Europe, an attack on the independence and territorial integrity of a sovereign state, and we express our continued support and solidarity with Ukraine and its people. In the past 3 years, we have supported Ukraine in all fields, and we will continue to do so in these uncertain and critical times. We are very thankful and deeply impressed by the testimony today of Axinia and Junia, and we ask for the immediate release of each and every one of the illegally detained civilians and prisoners in the occupied territories of Ukraine, including the Ukrainian children in Russian hands. We are sure that those responsible will be held accountable for their heinous crimes. Again, no agreement on Ukraine without Ukraine, and no agreement on European security without Europe. This is the time for the Council of Europe to stand up and defend our principles against tyranny. We are right, and we will prevail. Dear Boris, your cause is ours. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Ignacio. I give now the floor to Latvia, followed by Switzerland and France. Madam Ambassador, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wish to thank our guests from Ukraine for their testimony here at the Council of Europe. Your voices matter. Thank you for your courage. For 3 years now, Ukraine has been defending its homeland with extraordinary courage against Russia's aggression. Russia's brutal war has claimed countless innocent Ukrainian lives. It continues to cause enormous human suffering and destruction on a daily basis. The gravity of Russia's violations since the onset of its full-scale invasion, including in the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine, goes against any and all international law. Just to name some of Russia's war tactics: attacks on schools and hospitals, torture, sexual violence, and illegal deportations of children. And we heard today horrifying details about the conditions of illegally detained Ukrainian civilians. Impunity for the crime of aggression and war crimes must not prevail. Russia must face accountability. Ukraine has shown the world what true resilience means. We must ensure that Ukraine gets everything it needs on the battlefield and beyond. By the end of the last year, the government and people of Latvia had provided nearly 860 million euros in support to Ukraine. We will continue to support Ukrainian civilians in Latvia, Ukraine's reconstruction, and provide humanitarian and military aid. Achieving a just and lasting peace based on respect for Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity is crucial for the stability and security of both Ukraine and Europe. Borders must not be altered by force, and we will never recognize the illegal annexation of Crimea, Sevastopol, or any other region of Ukraine. Latvia's support for Ukraine's independence and territorial integrity is unwavering and unconditional. Ukraine, we stand with you.
Thank you, Agnès. Now I give the floor to Switzerland, France, and Denmark. Monsieur le collègue, vous avez la parole.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Pour la 3e année consécutive, la Suisse appelle la Russie à cesser immédiatement toutes les hostilités, à retirer sans délai ses troupes du territoire ukrainien internationalement reconnu. Une paix juste et durable en Ukraine ne pourra être atteinte que par un engagement résolu fondé sur le droit international, y compris la Charte des Nations Unies. La Suisse continuera de soutenir toutes les initiatives visant à instaurer une telle paix. Une solution durable n'est possible que si l'Ukraine est également partie aux négociations. La situation des civils internés et des prisonniers de guerre demeure une préoccupation majeure. Le droit international humanitaire impose à tous les parties de garantir la protection et le traitement digne des personnes privées de liberté. Ces règles, fondées sur les principes d'humanité, s'imposent en toutes circonstances. À cet égard, la Suisse soutient pleinement le travail de l'Agence centrale de recherche du CICR dans ses efforts pour collecter, centraliser et transmettre des informations concernant les personnes disparues. La Suisse appelle les autorités russes à pleinement coopérer avec le CICR en lui donnant accès aux lieux de détention en Russie y inclut les territoires ukrainiens temporairement occupés. Alors que nous entrons dans cette quatrième année de l'agression militaire, nous continuons à appeler au strict respect du droit international, notamment du droit international humanitaire et des droits de l'homme. Nos pensées vont aujourd'hui aux victimes et à leurs familles, ainsi qu'à la population touchée par la guerre en Ukraine. La Suisse reste engagée dans l'aide humanitaire, la diplomatie et la reconstruction de l'Ukraine. Merci, monsieur.
Merci, chers collègues. Je passe la parole à la France. Monsieur l'ambassadeur, vous avez la parole.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. La France s'associe bien sûr à la déclaration de l'Union européenne. Depuis 3 ans, la Russie viole de manière flagrante la souveraineté et l'intégrité territoriale de l'Ukraine. Depuis 3 ans, la Russie inflige des souffrances abominables aux populations civiles ukrainiennes et nous en avons eu 2 témoignages bouleversants ce matin. Merci à vous, Yulia et Aksinia. En pleine admiration pour votre courage, vous n'êtes pas seuls. Depuis 3 ans, la Russie bafoue le droit international humanitaire. La Russie répondra de ces crimes devant les juridictions internationales et ukrainiennes grâce aux mécanismes d'enquête mis en place. Les auteurs de ces crimes devront rendre des comptes et les victimes devront obtenir réparation. La France soutient le registre des dommages établi sous les auspices du Conseil de l'Europe. Elle suit de près les travaux visant à mettre en place une commission internationale des réclamations pour l'Ukraine. Cette guerre d'agression a aussi des conséquences au-delà des frontières ukrainiennes et européennes. Dans le reste du monde, elle aggrave la crise alimentaire, renforce l'insécurité énergétique et menace la sécurité nucléaire. La France est engagée en faveur d'une résolution du conflit, mais pour que la paix soit globale, juste et durable, elle doit s'appuyer sur le droit international. Elle doit respecter la souveraineté, l'intégrité territoriale et l'indépendance de l'Ukraine. Elle doit se négocier avec l'Ukraine. Elle doit aussi engager l'Europe dont la sécurité est en jeu. Il n'y aura ni paix ni sécurité si l'agression est récompensée. Depuis le début de l'agression russe, la France se tient aux côtés de l'Ukraine. La France est prête à renforcer son soutien à l'Ukraine et à le maintenir aussi longtemps que nécessaire. Je vous remercie.
Merci, Pape. Je passe maintenant la parole au Danemark, suivi de la Bulgarie et de la Croatie. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Many thanks, Chair. Sovereignty and territorial integrity are cornerstones of international order. Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine creates a dangerous precedent for the rest of the world. It must be stopped. The war has brought immense human suffering to the Ukrainian people, as we have heard today also from Julia and Aksinia, and many thanks to both of you for being here. The spirit and the perseverance of the Ukrainians facing such hardship are impressive and inspiring. You're not only fighting for Ukraine, you're also fighting for an international rule-based order. Denmark stands firmly with Ukraine. We have given Ukraine military, civilian and humanitarian support, and we will continue to do that. We have committed more than 9 billion euros to supporting Ukraine until 2028. In the Council of Europe, Ukraine has been on the top of the agenda the last 3 years, and I would like to thank Secretary General Berset for clearly saying that we should continue doing so. Also when it comes to the very important aim of holding Russia accountable for its crimes. We need a just peace, and we need security for Ukraine. And of course, Ukraine shall have a place at the negotiating table, and Europe, the EU, has to be involved. Finally, a few words to our Ukrainian colleagues here in Strasbourg, to you and your team, Boris. Many thanks for your tireless work. You and your country can count on Denmark. We stand firmly by your side. Many thanks.
Thank you, Jens. I give now the floor to Bulgaria, followed by Croatia and Germany. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Today, we solemnly mark 3 years since the start of Russia's illegal and unprovoked war of aggression against Ukraine. Today, we must ensure that military aggression and territorial annexation never become viable pathways to achieving geopolitical goals. Today, we should remind about the courage and resilience of the Ukrainian people. Dear Yulia and Aksenia, you are not alone. Over the past 3 years, the Ukrainian people have endured immense suffering, destruction, and loss. Thousands of innocent civilians, including children, have been killed or wounded. This should never happen again. My country, Bulgaria, strongly condemns Russia's ongoing aggression against Ukraine. Today, we once again reiterate our unwavering support for the Ukrainians' independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity within its internationally recognized borders. As for the peace talks, no initiative or peace negotiation formula should be discussed without Ukraine. The principles of any roadmap for future peace must include accountability for Russia's crime in Ukraine. We support the Council of Europe's efforts in this regard towards the establishing a special tribunal and a fair claims mechanism to fulfill the mandate of the Register of Damage. Completing this work is crucial to ensuring a peaceful and just future for Ukraine. I thank you.
Thank you, Maria. I give now the floor to Croatia, followed by Germany and Estonia. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Croatia fully aligns itself with the statement of the European Union. Russia's aggression against Ukraine has resulted not only in tremendous loss of life and material damage, but also, as we have heard today by shocking testimonies of our guests, in widespread civilian suffering, systematic mistreatment and torture. Croatia extends its deepest sympathies to the Ukrainian people and reaffirms its unwavering commitment to support Ukraine for as long as necessary. As a nation with first-hand experience of war and aggression, Croatia remains steadfastly committed to the advocacy and implementation of international law and international humanitarian law, particularly the Fourth Geneva Convention regarding the protection of civilians during the armed conflict. We firmly believe that universal application of these legal frameworks, coupled with accountability for violations, represents the only viable path forward in these challenging times. Mr. Chair, allow me to emphasize that Croatia is actively engaged in addressing yet another tragic consequence of war, the issue of missing persons. We continue to search for 1,782 individuals who disappeared during our homeland war, and we remain determined to ascertain their fate and whereabouts. In this context, we strongly urge all relevant parties to provide access to archives and information sources that could help resolve these cases and alleviate the suffering of affected families. Our commitment in this field has been recognized through the Global Alliance for the Missing, an ICRC initiative where Croatia will serve as a co-chair alongside Switzerland for the next 2 years. Drawing from our tragic national experience, Croatia stands ready to share experience and support with the Ukrainian friends in addressing this humanitarian challenge. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Thomas. Next delegations are Germany, Estonia, and Finland. Madam Ambassador, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Of course, we do support every word of the EU statement. For 3 years, the people of Ukraine defend their country, their children, and their freedom against the unprovoked and illegal Russian war of aggression. Ukraine is not only defending its own country, but also the basic values and principles of this organization. Russia is the aggressor that fundamentally attacks European security and international order. And you are right, Aksenia and Yulia, we do not have the right to be silent. Therefore, we call upon Russia once again to stop its aggression immediately and to withdraw all troops unconditionally, to release those illegally arrested and prisoners of war immediately, and to return all abducted persons, especially the children. Reports not only of the Council of Europe show worse crimes of Russia, including the abduction of children, victims deliberately taken in attacks on civilian targets, mistreatment, and even killing of defenseless prisoners of war. Thank you for your testimonies. Your voices do matter. All flagrant violations of international law, including war crimes, must not go unpunished. Russia must be held accountable, and the Council of Europe will do. No one wants peace more like the men and women in Ukraine. After years of terror and suffering, we are ready to do all efforts to achieve peace through strength for Ukraine. And one thing is clear, the Ukrainians themselves must have the last word. Nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you, Heike. I give now the floor to Estonia, followed by Finland and Slovenia. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Thank you for organizing this extraordinary CM where we had the possibility to listen to the brave witnesses of the Russian horrific crimes against Ukrainian civilians. We listened and we will not be silent. Today, when we stand united in remembrance of 3 years since the Russian aggression in Ukraine began, for the people of Estonia, this conflict is not a distant tragedy. It's a stark reminder of the fragile nature of peace and the human cost of aggression. 3 years ago, the world watched in disbelief as Ukraine was thrust into a brutal struggle for its sovereignty, its people, and its future. Today, we are still witnessing incredible resilience, bravery, and determination from the Ukrainian people. We have offered support, not just in words, but in actions, providing humanitarian aid, military assistance, and unwavering political backing. Estonia has some days ago decided to increase military aid to Ukraine by 25 million euros, on top of our commitment to allocate 0.25% of our GDP to Ukraine for military aid. In order to achieve lasting peace in Europe, it must be taken into account that Russia has not changed the original goals of its aggression: to subdue Ukraine and reorganize the European security architecture. For peace to last, Ukraine must have a functioning security guarantee. Ukraine's security is also a matter of European security, which cannot be decided without Ukraine, without Europe. Ukraine's right to choose alliances cannot be a bargain chip. This is a critical moment when Europe must show determination and courage to act. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give now the floor to Finland, followed by Slovenia and Czechia. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Chair. And in addition to this statement by the EU, I would like to reiterate today over and over again Finland's condemnation in the strongest possible terms of Russia's unprovoked and illegal war of aggression against Ukraine, which is a blatant violation of the UN Charter as well as the most serious and direct threat to European security. We have heard powerful testimonies today by Aksenia and Julia, though utterly sad and unmeasurable in terms of human suffering. Thank you for this. With regard to the arbitrary deprivation of liberty of Ukrainian civilians, large-scale torture, sexual violence, extrajudicial killings, etc., we also remain highly alarmed by the reports by the OSCE Moscow mechanism. Russia's reign of terror has systematically and deliberately targeted Ukrainian civilians, which can be considered a crime against humanity. Silence is no option, or the contrary. Russia and its leadership must be held fully accountable for waging a war of aggression against Ukraine and for other most serious crimes under international law, as well as for the massive damage caused by its war. As has been said here, and also by Mr. Secretary General per se, here the Council of Europe really plays a crucial role against impunity, for accountability and for justice. Finally, peace to be sustainable needs to be just and respect international rules-based order. A just peace cannot reward the aggressor. And peace in Ukraine cannot be negotiated without Ukraine. The basic conditions for peace are Ukraine's independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity. It's of paramount importance to immediately increase all measures that will strengthen Ukraine's position in relation to Russia. Finland's support for Ukraine in all aspects remains unwavering. We stand with the brave and heroic people and the legitimate government of Ukraine, today, tomorrow, and as long as needed, as our President Alexander Stubb has repeated in Kiev today. Thank you.
Thank you, Sini. Give now the floor to Slovenia, followed by Czechia and North Macedonia. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. We have gathered today to mark 3 years of brutal Russian aggression against Ukraine, 3 years of death, suffering, and destruction, 3 years of flagrant violation by Russia of fundamental norms and principles of international law. 3 years ago, Russia was not provoked, nor threatened, nor attacked. 3 years ago, Russia launched its armed aggression against Ukraine. But tremendous courage and resilience of Ukrainians in defending their sovereignty and the solidarity of the international community countered Russian invasion. My heart goes out in solidarity to the people of Ukraine and to the Ukrainian delegation here in the room. Thank you for your testimonies. Our admiration goes to all political prisoners who remain faithful to the country and the values despite the horrors of prison. You are not alone. Ukraine is an independent and sovereign state with internationally recognized borders. Slovenia stands firm in upholding the sovereign right of Ukraine to defend its territorial integrity and to chart its own future. There can be no talks on the future of Ukraine without Ukraine. Justice must be served in Ukraine. The crimes committed in Ukraine must not go unpunished. Slovenia supports the establishment of the Special Tribunal for the crime of aggression against Ukraine. Slovenia is a staunch advocate of international law and therefore supports all efforts to punish the perpetrators of the crimes committed in Ukraine. The Ljubljana Hague Convention will also contribute to this end. Slovenia will continue to help Ukraine for as long as it takes. It will provide shelter for Ukrainian refugees, humanitarian demining, and psychosocial and medical rehabilitation, and support Ukraine in its reconstruction. Thank you.
Thank you, Berta. I give now the floor to Czechia, followed by North Macedonia and Cyprus. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Mr. Chair, President of PACE, dear Ukrainian friends, while fully subscribing to the EU statement, we would like to add a few words in our national capacity. For the third year, Ukrainians have been defending their country from Russian aggression. They fight for survival, freedom, and their future, for our future. The message from the Czech diplomacy to Ukraine is clear. We will provide support as long as it takes, including the military one. This message was made clear even more yesterday by our President and thousands of people in the Old Town Square in Prague. The full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine has affected millions of innocent people, including political prisoners. It is absolutely essential to listen to their stories, as we have done today. The international humanitarian law must be respected in all circumstances, particularly when it comes to the protection of illegally detained civilians. These testimonies we have heard will remain in our hearts. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. I give now the floor to North Macedonia, followed by Cyprus and Turkey. Colleague, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We welcome the presence of our guests from Ukraine at the Council of Europe's Committee of Ministers and thank them for sharing their heartbreaking testimonies. We deeply regret the horrible experiences of the Ukrainian prisoners of war and their families and admire their courage and resilience. As we mark the third year of Russia's devastating aggressions against Ukraine, I would like to reaffirm our support for Ukraine and its people in defending their country, their freedom, and their undeniable right to choose their own destiny as an independent and free nation. North Macedonia stands committed to international peace and stability and to the universal principles of solidarity and support for those who strive for freedom and justice. Democracy, human rights, and the rule of law are universal values and must be respected by all. Violations of human rights and international humanitarian law must be thoroughly investigated and perpetrators held accountable under international law. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Give now the floor to Cyprus, followed by Turkey and Lithuania. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you again, Mr. Chair. I would have been remiss had I not started with associating ourselves with the EU statement. We are all here today to reiterate once again that Ukraine is not alone. Russia's war of aggression has caused unthinkable consequences for the country and immeasurable loss to its people. We are touched by the powerful statements by Yulia and Axinia, who spoke of their horrendous ordeals. Rest assured, you are not alone. Allow me to allude to yet another of the tragic consequences of this war, namely Ukrainian children who have forcibly been deported to Russia. A generation of Ukrainian children has experienced fear, loss, tragedy, and violence. Today, we reiterate our determination and persistence to act as catalysts for their safe return to their families. In closing, Mr. Chair, let me echo previous speakers in stressing the need to step up our efforts to support Ukraine's sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity. Illegality stemming from invasion, occupation, and use of force can never be tolerated. Thus, a lasting peace for Ukraine can only be in accordance with international law. Thank you very much.
Thank you, George. The next delegations are Turkey, Lithuania, and Austria. Madam Ambassador, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. It is with profound sadness that we are entering the 4th year of the war in Ukraine, which has caused immense suffering to the people of this country, as well as great loss and material damage. The resilience demonstrated by the Ukrainian people throughout this period is commendable. I'd like to take this opportunity to extend once again heartfelt condolences to the Ukrainian delegation and to the Ukrainian people for those who lost their lives in the war. The testimonies shared today are a stark reminder that civilians pay the highest price of war, whether it's in Ukraine or elsewhere. Distinguished delegates, today's extraordinary meeting is being held at a time of major changes in the dynamics of the war. While talks were almost simultaneously being held in Paris and Riyadh with certain stakeholders, President Zelensky, together with his high-level delegation, was on an official visit to Ankara on the 18th of February, upon invitation by President Erdogan. During the visit, Turkey's steadfast support to independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity of Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders was again reiterated at the highest level. It was recalled that Turkey has acted to be a reliable partner for both sides, and President Erdogan emphasized that direct negotiations between the two countries hosted in Istanbul in March 2022 stand out as a point of reference as the only platform where the parties came closest to reaching an agreement. President Erdogan once again reiterated readiness to continue diplomatic efforts to ensure a lasting peace. At this point, allow me to bring to the committee's attention that today, as we speak, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation, Sergei Lavrov, is on an official visit to Turkey. While a new international geopolitical conjuncture is currently emerging, Turkey stays committed to securing a fair and sustainable peace in Ukraine and will continue its efforts to prioritize effective and result-oriented diplomacy. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Nordan. Give now the floor to Lithuania, followed by Austria and United Kingdom. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, my heartfelt thanks, admiration and respect go to Yulia and Aksenia for their courage and very important testimonies. Lithuania is, of course, fully aligned with the statement by the European Union. A few remarks in my national capacity. Russia started its invasion of Ukraine in 2014 with the occupation of Crimea and deployment of forces in eastern Ukraine. The lack of appropriate response back then encouraged Russia to further violate international law by launching the largest military aggression on the European continent since World War II. Putin doesn't want peace. His goal of further territorial conquest in pursuit of his imperialist dream has not changed. We should not buy into the misleading narrative that Putin is negotiating for peace. The Council of Europe protects the principles of the rule of law, human rights and democracy. We marked important achievements. Russia was expelled from the Council. A comprehensive compensation mechanism and a special tribunal will help ensure accountability and compensate the victims. Ideally, the tribunal should not apply immunity to the top political and military leaders responsible for the crime of aggression. We must stop the Russian aggression, not just end the war. Hasty deals and concessions to the aggressor would not help achieve sustainable peace. Appeasement, let alone rewarding of the aggressor, would only lead to more aggression. There is only one path toward a fair and sustainable solution: maximizing the support for Ukraine, providing sustainable security guarantees, notably NATO membership, making sure that Russia is held to account and gains nothing from this aggression, and effectively deterring any further aggression. I thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Andreas. I give now the floor to Austria, followed by the United Kingdom and Albania. Madam Ambassador, you have the floor.
Dziękuję, Ksenia I Julia, za wasze prezentacje. It is important to us and to the Council of Europe's public to listen to your testimony and to act on it. Let me greet you warmly, dear Boris, today and always in full solidarity. As Austria fully aligns with the Council of the EU statement, I should be very brief. Today, it's been 3 years since Russia started its unprovoked, brutal and illegal war of aggression against Ukraine. Ukraine deserves a comprehensive, just and lasting peace that guarantees the interests of Ukraine and our own. No negotiations on Ukraine without Ukraine.
Thank you, Aloysia. I give now the floor to Albania, followed by Andorra and Greece. Madam, you have the floor.
I think it's UK first.
Thank you, Chair. Allow me first to deeply thank on behalf of my delegation our guests, Julia and Aksenia, for their bold testimonies before the Committee of Ministers and for their courage and resilience. You are not alone. We are with you. We stand with you and with Ukraine. 3 years ago, we woke up to Europe changed forever. The Russian brutal aggression against Ukraine shattered our security architecture, defied our values, and tested our resolve. 3 years later, the war is not over. The suffering of the Ukrainian people has not ceased. Their resilience, however, remains unbreakable. Today we gather once again, not out of formality, but out of duty. Our commitment to Ukraine is not merely a political stance. It is a moral imperative. Every life lost, every home destroyed, and every child displaced is a reminder that we cannot afford fatigue, hesitation, or division. We must ensure that Ukraine is not left alone, that justice is not left undone, and that our principles are not left behind. The world around us is shifting. Political uncertainty, strategic recalibrations, and global power struggles are shaping a new, unpredictable reality. But let us be clear, our unity must not be conditional. Our defense of international law must not waver. The values that bind us, the very foundation of the Council of Europe, must remain our compass. If there is one lesson from these past 3 years, it is that indifference enables aggression, silence fuels impunity, and hesitation costs lives. We cannot allow fatigue to set in. We must reinforce our support to Ukraine, not just in words, but in action, through legal accountability, financial assistance, reconstruction efforts, and a clear path for Ukraine's integration into our democratic family. History will judge us not by the words we speak, but by the actions we take. Let it be said that in the face of aggression, the Council of Europe stood firm, that we did not compromise on justice, that we did not betray our values, that we defend not just Ukraine, but the very essence of what Europe stands for. Slava Ukraini.
Thank you. Now, United Kingdom. Sorry, Ambassador, you have the floor.
No problem. Thank you, Chair. The UK is aligned with the EU statement, but I wanted to say a few words in a national capacity. First of all, Yulia and Aksiana, thank you. Thank you for being with us today, and above all, thank you for your courage in sharing your testimonies. We must not forget that your testimonies are testimonies which could be repeated millions of times. 80% of Ukrainians have lost a close friend or family member in the past 3 years. 3.7 million are internally displaced. 6.3 million have sought refuge abroad. People in Kharkiv have spent 300 days, or 1 day in 3, in full air raid alert. We must never forget the extent to which Ukraine and its people have suffered since 2014, and above all since the start of the unjustified, illegal and barbaric full-scale invasion 3 years ago. We must not forget, but above all, we must act, because Ukraine's suffering and fight are for our collective freedom, for human rights, democracy and the rule of law, the values which are central to the Council of Europe and which are under threat today as never before. When they spoke over the weekend, the UK Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, reiterated the UK's ironclad support for Ukraine and his commitment to securing a just and enduring peace to bring an end to Russia's illegal war. It's vital that the Council of Europe and all its member states continue to offer and deliver ironclad support and stand with Ukraine for as long as it takes to secure peace, justice and accountability.
Thank you, Sandy. Now we have Andorra, Greece and Hungary. Madame, you have the floor.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Nous voulons d'abord signaler le courage de Yulia et Aksinia pour parler de la situation des prisonniers de guerre. Vos interventions sont nécessaires pour témoigner cette réalité. L'Andorre souhaite joindre sa voix à celles qui ont exprimé leur plein soutien à l'Ukraine à l'occasion du 3e anniversaire d'un événement si tragique qui est la guerre d'agression. Nous espérons que cela sera la dernière occasion de commémorer cet anniversaire, mais en plaçant toujours l'Ukraine au centre des négociations pour atteindre la paix. Nous nous trouvons dans un moment décisif pour agir ensemble pour mettre fin à cette guerre, mais aussi pour montrer notre engagement envers la population ukrainienne et pour contribuer à sa reconstruction. L'Andorre a montré son soutien en devenant partie du registre des dommages et par le via des diverses contributions volontaires en accueillant des réfugiés et en participant aux négociations de la forme de paix. Nous espérons que cette journée sera vue comme un moment d'espoir pour la fin de la guerre, sans oublier qu'il y a encore beaucoup à faire pour le rétablissement des victimes et de l'Ukraine. Merci.
Merci, Madame. I give now the floor to Greece, followed by Hungary and San Marino. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As Greece fully aligns with the EU statement, let me first thank our guests, Yulia and Aksinia, for their moving testimony, putting names and faces on the actual victims, the civilians suffering these horrendous war crimes, and assure them that we are listening and that we are with you. We are contemplating the sad third anniversary from the start of the full-scale aggression of Russia against Ukraine. Since the beginning, Greece has condemned in the most unequivocal terms the unprovoked aggression of Russia. We have provided and we will continue to provide humanitarian and military aid to Ukraine, and we have welcomed in our country thousands of Ukrainian refugees. On our side, we participate actively to all initiatives that aim to achieve accountability of the aggressor for the violation of all aspects of international law, which is our guiding principle. We condemn the change of international borders by force, and we support the independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity of Ukraine within its international recognized borders. We believe that there can be no lasting peace without justice, no peace agreement for Ukraine without Ukraine. There can be no agreement for the security of Europe without Europe. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicholas. Now we switch to Hungary, San Marino, and Ireland. Hungary, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. As a neighboring country to Ukraine, we are deeply concerned about the ongoing war of aggression against Ukraine, which has since its outbreak resulted in a dire situation and caused immense and grave human suffering for millions of people living in Ukraine. Millions of Ukrainians had to flee their home country. The longer the war continues, the longer we extend the appalling situation for Ukrainians. The 3-year anniversary is a grim milestone. After so much suffering and many innocent victims, destructions of civilian and key infrastructure, we support finding a solution to stop the bloodshed, to prevent further escalation by achieving a ceasefire and promoting comprehensive, just, and lasting peace that will guarantee the long-term security of the European continent. We continue to support the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders. We welcome that ending the war of aggression and achieving a lasting peace is a top priority for the Trump administration. The new approach of the United States has fundamentally changed the geopolitical realities for both Europe and Ukraine. Hungary, since last year, spared no efforts trying to foster dialogue on these issues with the relevant actors at the highest level to achieve these peace objectives as soon as possible and to come to a negotiated conclusion. We see the US administration's desire to end the war of aggression the quickest possible as a confirmation of the respective Hungarian position. Hungary has been supporting Ukraine by providing assistance since the outbreak of the war, including humanitarian assistance to Ukrainian refugees arriving massively to our country. To the Ukrainian energy sector, mitigate the damage done by playing a crucial role in stabilizing Ukraine's energy infrastructure during the ongoing conflict, making significant infrastructural investment to support Ukraine integration into the European synchronization network, exporting diesel fuel and gas, to name most important ones. By the beginning of February 2022, the total amount provided by the Hungarian budget in this context of armed conflict to Ukraine is approaching 200 billion euros. Just a few words, if you allow. Hungary has also been contributing to Ukraine's security by actively participating in reinforcing NATO's deterrence and defense posture in the eastern flank. Hungary counts on the positive role of the Council of Europe in the area of protecting the rights of national minorities. In the case of Hungarians living in Ukraine, we will continue to speak out for their rights, and we continue our engagement for Ukrainian partners so that the Hungarians living in Ukraine get their already acquired rights reestablished in line with the International Council of Europe standards. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. I give now the floor to San Marino, followed by Ireland and Iceland. Madam, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I would like to thank our guests for their testimony. In this third tragic anniversary, San Marino would like to reaffirm its unwavering support to the independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity of Ukraine, and renew its sincere solidarity to the government and people of Ukraine. San Marino reiterates its firm condemnation of the Russian Federation's unprovoked and unjustified war of aggression against Ukraine as a violation of international law, which has entailed also serious breaches of humanitarian law and countless acts of disrespect of the international human rights system that this organization promotes and protects. The register of damage is a proof of the willingness as European community of values incarnate in this organization to take the side of all the civilians and not to leave their suffering unheard. San Marino stands ready to its commitments along with the other member and associate states in the prosecution of the register mandate and in the contribution that our organization will continue to bring in the field of international justice. We welcome the recent appointment of the Special Envoy of the Council of Europe Secretary General on the situation of the children of Ukraine and stand ready to support the initiatives that will contribute to share the importance of the protection of the human rights of the children of Ukraine. In line with its millenary vocation for peace, San Marino remains embraced to the hope that through diplomacy and the cooperation of the international community, a comprehensive, just and lasting peace will be soon achieved for all the people of Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. I give now the floor to Ireland, followed by Iceland and Liechtenstein.
Thank you, Chair, for convening this meeting, sadly marking the third anniversary of Russia's launch of its full-scale invasion of Ukraine. While fully aligning with the EU statement, permit me to make a brief intervention in my national capacity. I would like first to echo colleagues' appreciation for the powerful testimony by our guests this morning, Aksina and Yulia, and our admiration of their courage and resilience in the face of such brutal adversity. We are humbled by your heroic efforts and that of your friends, neighbours and fellow countrymen and women in defending your country and the universal values that we in Ireland and people across Europe also hold dear. This is an extremely difficult moment for Ukraine. The information circulated last week by the Ukrainian Parliament Commissioner for Human Rights lays bare the devastating impact of Russia's illegal actions. These acts amount to flagrant violations of human rights and strike at the heart of the Council of Europe's values. Together with our European partners, we will continue to build global support for a comprehensive, just and lasting peace on Ukraine's terms, based on respect for the principles of the UN Charter and international law, and with justice and accountability at its heart. Ireland's support for Ukraine has focused on humanitarian and stabilisation assistance and political support, including strong support for Ukraine's European perspective. Since February 2022, over 110,000 Ukrainians forced to leave their homeland have sought sanctuary in Ireland. They have integrated well into Irish society and have contributed richly to our culture. We have no doubt that in time they will play a crucial role in rebuilding their country when it is once again safe to do so. Although Ukraine currently faces an extremely challenging situation on the ground, and a just and lasting peace might seem an uncertain prospect, we must not falter in our resolve. We recognise that our continued support for Ukraine is a necessity, not a choice. That is why we stand with Ukraine now and in its future. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. We have now 8 delegations still asking for the floor. I will now close the list. Those who would like then to take the floor can do it on Wednesday. And I give the floor now to Iceland, followed by Liechtenstein and Luxembourg.
Thank you, Chair. Today we mark 3 years since Russia launched a full-scale invasion, an invasion that already began in 2014, still asking her 3 years later how such aggression could happen again in Europe after the Second World War. Iceland would like to reiterate its full support to Ukraine and salute the courage of the Ukrainian people. And for that, we would like to thank you, Aksina and Yulia, for your really important testimonies. Iceland allied with the EU statement where we recall the Reykjavik summit and reiterate our support for a just and lasting peace based on the principle of the UN Charter and international law. We also underline the principle that no initiative regarding Ukraine be taken without Ukraine. We strongly condemn the ongoing widespread and gross violation of international human rights and grave violation of humanitarian law that have been committed by Russia and call on Russia to immediately and unconditionally cease its aggression and release unlawfully detained civilians and prisoners of war and return all persons, in particular children, who have been forcibly transferred or deported. In Reykjavik, the leader of Europe underlined that the Council of Europe is a peace project built on the promise of never again, and underlined that we have a common responsibility to fight autocratic tendencies and growing threat to human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. We need to strive to uphold them each and every day, continuously in all parts of our continent. At the Reykjavik summit, our leader also underlined the accountability and established the register of damage for Ukraine. The Council of Europe now continues to deliver on the next step toward a compensation mechanism, a claims commission, and a special tribunal, which we are calling for. A special envoy on the situation of children of Ukraine has recently been appointed. Children of Ukraine, among them thousands who have been unlawfully deported and forcibly transferred by Russia, must not be forgotten. It is now vital to uphold the core value of this now more than 75 years old organization, the Council of Europe, Human Rights, Democracy and Rule of Law. Thank you.
Thank you. I give now the floor to Liechtenstein, followed by Luxembourg and Italy. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. In addition to the EU statement to which Liechtenstein aligned, let me state the following, and first of all, let me thank Julia and Axinia for their testimonies. Both supporting Ukraine and advancing efforts to ensure accountability for the crimes committed by the Russian Federation remain high on our agendas. We support the essential role of the Council of Europe with respect to Ukraine, in particular in the area of accountability and the agenda which finds itself at a critical juncture. We are active supporters of the Register of Damages and are actively engaged in the follow-up activities to create a claims commission and a compensation mechanism for the damages Ukraine has sustained as a result of the aggression by the Russian Federation. We also hope that the core group for the creation of a special tribunal for the aggression against Ukraine will finalize its work when gathering here in Strasbourg next month. We realize that the lengthy negotiation process has led to concessions with respect to the provisions of the statute that make the original goal of achieving a genuine international tribunal difficult. At the same time, a meaningful and early outcome of our discussions at the technical level is possible and hopefully in place soon in order to enable consideration at political level. Thank you.
Thank you, Dominique. I give now the floor to Luxembourg, followed by Italy and Armenia. Madame, you have the floor.
Merci. Le Luxembourg s'aligne pleinement avec l'intervention de l'Union européenne. Ce matin, 3 ans se sont écoulés depuis que la Russie a lancé son invasion illégale, injustifiée et non provoquée à grande échelle contre l'Ukraine. Depuis 3 ans, cette guerre d'agression piétine les valeurs que nous défendons au quotidien. Il est essentiel de poursuivre notre soutien à l'Ukraine et à sa population. Nous remercions nos invités pour leur présence ici à Strasbourg et du tout courage dont elles font preuve pour raconter les épreuves difficiles qu'elles ont traversées et continuent de traverser. Comme elles l'ont expliqué, c'est la souffrance pour les personnes disparues et emprisonnées, pour leurs familles, pour l'Ukraine et pour l'Europe tout entière. Connaître la souffrance ainsi que partager un peu de leur espoir est essentiel. Depuis 3 ans maintenant, et dans certaines parties de l'Ukraine depuis 2014, nous sommes témoins de l'immense souffrance de la population civile. Les bombardements et les tirs incessants sur les villes, ciblant sans distinction écoles, hôpitaux et abris, ont causé des horreurs et des souffrances indicibles. De même, les efforts de russification à marche forcée menés par la Russie dans les territoires occupés représentent une grave violation des droits humains. À cet égard, il est également essentiel de porter notre attention sur les enfants ukrainiens vivant sous l'occupation russe ou déportés en Russie, à qui on nie leur nationalité et leur identité. La guerre touche toujours les populations civiles qui sont les premières victimes de ces atrocités. Comme l'a souligné le Premier ministre du Luxembourg, M. Ukrainian, lors de son échange téléphonique avec le président Zelensky la semaine dernière, le Luxembourg continuera à se tenir aux côtés des Ukrainiennes et Ukrainiens. Rien sur l'Ukraine ne peut être décidé sans l'Ukraine. Il ne peut y avoir de paix durable sans l'Ukraine et l'Europe.
Merci. Je donne maintenant la parole à l'Italie, suivie de l'Arménie et de la Slovaquie. Monsieur l'ambassadeur, vous avez la parole.
Thank you, Chair, for convening this meeting. And thank you, Mr. Secretary General and Mr. President of the Parliamentary Assembly for your interventions. While aligning with the EU statement, we wish to further commend the heroic courage and the resilience of all individuals who have suffered and are still suffering for the harsh situation of detention. And with reference to restoring conditions of life and infrastructures in Ukraine, let us on this occasion to confirm our strongest commitment for the reconstruction of Ukraine by hosting a dedicated conference in Rome this coming month of July, to which many partners internationally have already announced their participation. Thank you.
Thank you, Roberto. Maintenant, les 4 dernières délégations sont l'Arménie, la Slovaquie, le Vatican et le Japon. Je donne la parole maintenant à l'ambassadeur d'Arménie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Armenia remains deeply concerned about the situation in Ukraine. Over the last 3 years, the conflict has resulted in widespread human suffering and devastation. Regrettably, civilians today account for the great majority of victims in armed conflicts, the vast majority of whom are women and children. Therefore, any initiative to convene an open debate on this very acute and pressing matter we consider crucially important. Protecting civilians during armed conflict is a cornerstone of international humanitarian law, which has regulated the conduct of parties and requires human treatment of civilian held captive, prisoners of war, wounded and the sick. We believe that the Council of Europe's most significant strength lies in its normative framework responsible for guaranteeing respect for human rights, particularly the European Convention on Human Rights and the European Court of Human Rights. Furthermore, the Court has consistently upheld that even in cases of international armed conflict, the protection outlined in the Convention remain in effect. It is also an absolute priority to safeguard the rights and ensure the safety and well-being of all civilians, including guaranteeing unimpeded humanitarian access, which, as we observed in the past, has been weaponized, delayed and otherwise restricted in a clear defiance of international law. As we have stated before, I would repeat that prioritization of international law, the respect for human rights and commitments to dialogue and diplomacy is imperative in shaping and guiding a collective response. And I thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Armen. I give now the floor to Slovakia, followed by the Holy See and Japan. Madam Ambassador, you have...
Thank you, Chair. Dear colleagues, we fully align with the EU statement. Thank you, dear Ukrainian friends, for your heartbreaking testimony shared with us today. And we call for immediate release of all those kept in Russian captivity. Now, on the national capacity, I would like to reiterate the fundamentals of the Slovak foreign policy regarding Ukraine. A peaceful, democratic and prosperous Ukraine is in our vital interest. Slovakia fully supports the independence, sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders. Any forcible change of borders is unacceptable to us. It is in this context that we perceive the ongoing Russian invasion. From our point of view, this conflict has no military solution. It is crucial to stop the killing and to achieve a comprehensive, just and lasting peace based on the basic principles of the UN Charter. As soon as possible, we use every opportunity to call for an end to hostilities in Ukraine and to the pursuit of a just peace. The final solution about Ukraine should not be made without Ukraine. Of course, the EU cannot be sidelined either. Slovakia helps Ukraine bilaterally from the beginning. We are one of the countries with the highest level of solidarity with Ukraine in terms of GDP. Thank you.
Thank you, Oksana. Give now the floor to the permanent observer of the Holy See.
Mr. President, I would like to thank you for organizing this special meeting on the 3rd anniversary of the beginning of the aggression against Ukraine. Unfortunately, we still have to state today that after 3 years of war, the greatly desired peace has not yet managed to take root in minds and hearts, despite the great numbers of victims and the massive destruction. During this time, the daily life of a Europe at peace has been dramatically confronted with the conflict. The Holy See is deeply concerned about this war and calls for the release of all prisoners of war and for the reunification of children with their families, convinced that the protection of the life and the dignity of every human being is the first step on the road to peace. Furthermore, war crimes must be prevented and international humanitarian law must be respected. Regrettably, In the current conflict, we have seen hospitals, schools, and churches being attacked. Unfortunately, we continue to see that the preferred path seems to be the violent one, motivated by each side's conviction that the military action is the only useful instrument. The OLC, on the other hand, renews its firm and urgent appeal to all the parties involved to put an end to the conflict, calling for an escape from the cycle of victory or defeat. As Pope Francis reminds us, the most serious conflict between nations can find a valid solution only through dialogue, the only weapon worthy of man and capable of ensuring lasting peace. It is time to engage in concrete dialogue and diplomacy in a sincere attempt to put an end to this heinous war. Thank you.
Thank you, Marco. I give now the floor to the permanent observer of Japan. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Aksinia Yulia, for your testimony. Japan once again expressed its respect for the bravery and the perseverance of the Ukrainian people in standing up to this aggression. Japan also once again condemned Russia's aggression against Ukraine. Various diplomatic efforts are currently being made regarding Ukraine. Japan sincerely hopes that these diplomatic efforts will lead to an end to the fighting in Ukraine and a breakthrough in the difficult situation. Japan intends to fulfill its role while working closely with the international community. In addition, Japan believes that the peace in Ukraine must be just and lasting. The nature of this peace could have a significant impact on global security and security in the Indo-Pacific region. Therefore, it must ensure that the wrong lessons are not drawn. To support Ukraine, Japan would like to provide even more support than before in the field of humanitarian assistance, finance, restoration, and reconstruction in close collaboration with the international community. In this context, I'm glad to announce that the government of Japan is now ready to make its full contribution to the register of damage for Ukraine for its financial year 2025. Thank you.
Thank you, Hiro. Chers collègues, je vous remercie pour vos nombreuses et significatives contributions à ce débat. Vous avez été très nombreux à prendre la parole. Chère Aksinia et chère Yulia, vous avez entendu le soutien et la solidarité exprimés par les membres du comité des ministres et vous avez aussi entendu à quel point les ambassadeurs ont exprimé leur admiration et leur respect pour votre courage d'être venus nous rencontrer et votre engagement. Et vous avez entendu aussi à quel point ils soutiennent votre cause. Donc, encore une fois, un grand merci d'être venus nous rencontrer aujourd'hui et merci beaucoup. Au revoir.